Hello and welcome to another episode of Community Update. Nicole Johnson is your host today, and she's joined by our guest, Yvonne Atwell.
Yvonne Atwell is a Canadian community activist, former provincial politician, and former executive director of Community Justice Society. She is known for being the first Black woman elected to the Nova Scotia House of Assembly. Yvonne joins me today to talk about her experience and the temperature, the climate on the political landscape today. Thank you for joining the show. It's a pleasure to have you today.
Thank you. It's nice to be here.
It's a pleasure. But share a little bit about who Yvonne Atwell is and where you're from, and then we'll kind of segue into how and why you got into politics.
Well, I was born and raised in East Preston, Nova Scotia, because my grandmother was a midwife. I often say that. And I'm a Thomas. My married name is Atwell, so Atwell Thomas Atwell. So I left home, like many of us did in the 60s, and went off to Toronto to find our fortune or whatever, and came back home in the late 80s, early 90s. So then just got involved in the community, seeing the community when I left. It hadn't changed a whole lot in 23 years. And so I started working with a few young people, and that's how I got involved in wanting to do something, not quite sure what, but, start slow. People have to accept you back in the community, those kinds of things.
Yes, absolutely.
So that worked well for me over time.
Wow. And so people came to you because they've seen something in you.
Yes,
right?
yes,
right.
they did.
Which is probably the best compliment anybody could approach someone to say,
you.
hey, would you
Yes.
represent and run for? And on that note, I want to ask, can you share some of the challenges, in terms of entering politics? Because what even inspired you to go there, yet alone to face challenges, I'm sure as a Black woman, I'm sure as a woman. So if you can segue into some of that, your interest in politics and then the challenges of it.
Well, I didn't really have an interest in politics from a big people's position.
Right.
Because the work in the community is always political anyway.
Right.
And so I never thought of it as moving to, representing the community and that sort of thing. But then, of course, because of the way the Preston was located and we had this new seat in the Prestons, that people were looking, who can we find in the community that may be interested in running? So we did have 3 people, 2 others who ran against me. We had somebody from Conservative Party, the Liberal Party. I ran for the NDP, and I actually won that nomination that took me to the first stage of being involved in the political arena. Winning the seat, I never really thought that beyond that, I didn't think I would win.
Right.
I did run. I ran a couple of times, but the 3rd time I ran, I did win. So which sort of takes you to another space of learning and understanding what the political system is all about, right? And it's never really what you think. Not for me anyway.
Well, and that's true. And I think that's a true statement from anybody, if you're honest. It's never what we envision or think until we're actually in the seats.
We're in there, right?
In that space.
And I think also during that time, because I was the first Black woman from the community of Preston, that there was a lot of discussion around how long I could stay in, whether I get voted out, what people thought of me. It was also during the feminist movement was very heavy during that time. But for me, it was just trying to see where it would go, how it's going to work out. But there were many challenges. There was many challenges within the community, right? Who kind of figured I wasn't qualified to do it. This sort of thing was kind of big for me. And even some of the larger communities, some of the women that had supported me sort of backed off in some ways. But at the same time, I had an enormous amount of people who came forward to support me. I had great organizers, great planners. And I think that's when I finally won. It was because of the great organization. And it takes time. It takes time to build a team. And you don't do it overnight. You have to be around. You have to know people. You have to talk to people.
Build relationships.
Yeah. And people have to know whether you're sincere or not. Do you really want to do this or, So those were most of the challenges. It was just trying to, figure out the best way to do it.
Right.
Particularly in the area that was not just the Preston, was not just the Black communities. We were only a quarter of that riding. We're still probably only a quarter of the riding.
Well,
right? So the needs were always very different as well.
Right, right. And you said the first, when you made a mention about, that people will make comments, and still do, I guess, for anybody who's stepping up. What do you know about politics? And you don't know anything about politics. Yeah. And that's a fair question. But at the same time, right? The first of anything, you're learning, and you're going to learn the job as you go, right? Because nobody's really an expert unless you've been in there for 30 plus years. But for you, how does that statement resonate with you when you hear that?
Well, people would say, I've had this comment a few times when I was running that, well, what makes you so smart, right? And I realized after I get involved in politics, that wasn't a requirement. But I mean, it was questions like that.
Yes.
And because I had a good team and great family who supported me 100%. My daughter as well, and her friends. This was great. She was in university at the time. That's what made it a lot easier to know that, and then being focused. Having your vision focused on what you want to do now. That also takes away some of the stress.
Right. And then the first Black woman in the House of Nova Scotia Assembly. What does that look like?
Well,
that's a heavy title, would you say?
Well, yeah. Well, once you're there, we were in opposition, so it's it can be striking just to be in that environment because it's pretty sterile, right? Everybody's got their own groups, their own, whether you're on opposition or whether you're in government. But then you have to learn. You learn based on, you're in the seats. So you understand the policies and procedures of how you got there within your party and how that happened. So in the House, you begin to follow through when you have meetings with your caucus. You have caucus meetings all the time. People discuss the issues of the day. People discuss question period. Mm-hmm. What questions are going to be asked? Who's going to ask them? Look at what's happening that's local, and also what's relevant for the day, for the week.
Right.
Because news change, so you have to be on top of it.
Right.
If something is a big story, you have to figure out with your your caucus how you're going to handle that and who handles that. So that's really quite interesting. And the dynamics is inside of caucus is very interesting. And then when you get to
we don't have time for all that, but I would love to have you back on the show. What that looks like, yes.
And then when you get to the House, then there's a whole procedure around that as well.
Right.
In terms of who asks questions, how many you can ask. Then you can acknowledge people. People come and watch you. They said in the I call them the pews.
Right. Well, that's a good way to put it, right? Because they do look like pews. Yes.
So that sort of thing, right?
Right.
So, yeah.
Can you explain to us what the different levels of government, like in terms of the municipal, right, which doesn't have a party affiliation, and the provincial and the federal, because they're all kind of, I don't know if they're levels, but they're just different. How would you explain that to those of us who don't really know?
Very simply, because I have been really, really involved. For example, the municipality. I did run many years ago for a minute. Municipality it's not partisan.
Yeah.
Supposedly, right? But everybody is in politics. Everything's political, right? Regardless of whether you belong to a party or not, it's all political. So you have to have some affiliation somewhere. So that's basically, you represent your community. You become the counselor within that community. You represent that community. The needs, you're supposed to be doing all those things so your community begins to feel safe.
Right.
Knowing you're taking their needs, to the full council, because council makes these decisions. It's the council. And then, of course, with provincial politics, it's very partisan. So you have three-party. We have a three-party system. Yes. Well, actually a four-party, if you want to look at it that way.
Yeah.
You have like the Green Party.
Right.
I don't know if that's still working here right now. But the three-party system, it's very clear how they work within the policies and procedures. And of course, in government, if they have the majority in the House, you really don't get very much done if you're in opposition.
Oh, right.
What you do, you constantly, fight for your rights. You fight for your communities. You fight for what you think is the community needs and maybe not getting provincially. And I think probably federally is the same. I don't have a lot of experience with that. Basically representing your constituencies, looking at your communities and how you bring those issues to the forefront.
Right.
And so you bring them you have that discussion within your party. But a lot of those are large issues, and you become a part of that.
Right.
When you're in government. Okay, the opposition, you become a part of the opposition who will challenge those things.
Right.
It's a very interesting place to be, and it can be very exciting, and it also can be very stressful, and there's days you just don't want to be there.
I love your honesty. I do. And I think, when I think about your work around your activism, your community activism, and, the pressing issues that you're seeing affecting, marginalized communities, in Nova Scotia, and how or what actions can be taken, and how do you encourage other people to get involved, or even young people?
In this day and age, so to speak, because there's so much, social media,
right,
information, kids have a lot of things to talk about.
Or opinions on. That's right.
Yeah. I think, for me, it would be like trying to find a direct line around political issues, because there's so much news out there that young people probably don't know what to believe, or it can be overwhelming to do nothing, right, at all, or leave it to somebody else, right?
Yeah.
I haven't seen a lot of, and maybe I'm missing many things because I'm not out there as much as I used to be, is the direct understanding of why young people need to be involved in politics. I don't think we get that yet.
Yeah.
I don't think we get that. Maybe it's because I'm a senior and I'm past thinking in many ways. When I first got into politics, what that felt like, what that meant in order to move things forward.
Right.
Well, many things are still stuck there.
Yes.
And many things are still stuck where my father's generation
That's
come
right,
from.
that's true.
His father, right? So the next generation can't just be silent. You got to take an active part. Wherever you take an active part, remember, it's all political. Now, I say this is just my opinion, right?
Yeah.
Buying a loaf of bread is political.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Okay? No, you're right.
So we have to remember that, I think, for some of our youth to have a different kind of discussion. Like I said, maybe they're having them already. But I think maybe that's why, I wanted to bring people together, kind of have a conversation around before the next election, to kind of think, where's our heads, right, as African Nova Scotians? Like, what are we thinking? Like, where do we want to go? What impact is this going to have on us? Right. Are we just going to sit silently and just wiggle our way through, and at the end of it, criticize the government that's in power? So there's lots of work that could be done.
Absolutely.
Particularly, I think, with our youth, if they want to get involved in politics. But it sounds boring, right? For some people.
It sounds boring, but when you get in conversations, right? And then
it
things
changes.
start, right, yeah. It does, because you're drawing people in, and people are being able to put their voices forward. I want to jump to that because we're going to jump to that because you put on a course, Power in Politics.
Yes.
And that exactly created that atmosphere for conversation.
Well, I think it was after the last election,
yes,
which was in August, I guess, 4 years ago. 4 years ago. Where there was a discussion around, how some of our African Nova Scotian folks in the communities, had certain positions and they lost their position because of the change in government,
right?
Those kinds of things, and it becomes very frustrating when you don't know what direction things are going. You have African Nova Scotian affairs, right? You have policies, procedures, you have diversity, inclusion in most of these departments, and yet everything sort of looks kind of stagnant, like it's not moving very far going. And then thinking about how our communities don't really get involved until there's an actual election. And then an organization may come together. They may have a debate
Right.
with the candidates, and somebody pulls together some questions that's been discussed in the community, and they're very legitimate questions because they have been discussed in the community. And then how do you lay that out? But how do you prepare for that? So the reason I wanted to put on the course was to start the discussion with former politicians, which was wonderful.
Yes, it was.
They all accommodated. And to start the discussion about how is that done? How do you prepare ahead of time so that when you talk to the leaders who are running in your community, whether it's federal or municipal or local.
Yeah.
So you're prepared for that. You have the questions that you want to ask them, and then hold their feet to the fire if they commit before they get your vote.
That's true. That's a big term. Hold their feet to the fire.
Yeah. So if you're going to tell me something, or if you're not going to show up,
Right.
to certain things that the
What
community.
does that speak of you going
That's
forward?
right. The community put on activities or whatever during that time. They want to see you. They want to hear from you. And you don't show, or you haven't done any homework about the community because you've been in your seat too long. That you can't answer the questions. So for me, having that program, it was very small. Maybe it wasn't well promoted.
Well, there was a lot going on, but I think the small was good for those of us who were there.
Well, the
because we were
small
able
was
to
good because
ask our questions and have meaningful conversations.
That's right.
Yes.
That's right. And so I'm thinking about doing another one, but there again, it's not planned yet.
Please.
But I wanted to do it before the next election.
Yes, absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely.
The provincial election.
Yes.
Right? Or even the federal election. But I haven't actually laid out the actual plan to do it.
Okay.
But we do have a little bit of a forerunner.
Yeah, absolutely.
With the first program.
Absolutely.
We kind of know what we need to do, how to do it a little bit, but to involve and include more people, and then have some young people come out and get involved in asking questions, sharing their ideas, those kinds of things.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, so in regards to the politics, because for what I understand with you, it's community politics.
Yes.
Stuff that we do every day, right? It's not when the elections show up, it's around community politics, perspective, opinions, thoughts, our young people. And I think that is something that people can, level up to, as opposed to having conversations over their heads, right? So when you have those discussions with people, what are the most things that they say to you? Oh, Miss Yvonne, da 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 da, or Miss Yvonne, like, I don't know if I can because I just think it's more than what you might bite off more than what you can chew. But some of us are doing these jobs every day.
Well, yes, I mean that's where it starts.
Yeah. You're just putting it into practice, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at, if like we were in opposition.
Yes.
So you have an office, you have a staff person. In your work, oftentimes are basically kind of like social work.
Yeah.
Because people come to you with issues in the community.
Yes.
They come to you with things they need done. And as representing the Prestons at that time, which is only a quarter of our communities at that time.
At the time, yeah.
So we're small, so you had to fit into the larger community and their needs and their wants because you're representing everybody.
Absolutely.
You're representing everybody. So basically that's where your community background comes from, because if you're out there in the community, you know what the issues are already. So you just kind of build on that when you're talking to people and you try to bring them forward when you're in the house.
Right.
Yeah.
So how important is representation when it comes to leadership in these positions and how they impact policies? Like if people like us are not there, right? Mm-hmm. That's not really effective.
Well, you don't know what goes on, number one.
Okay.
I mean, you can speculate, but sometimes you know for yourself, when you enter a certain space, if you enter that space, oftentimes there could be a change in energy.
A shift.
You can feel that.
Yeah,
you
absolutely.
can feel that. One way or the other. It can be an accepting shift, or it could be a sort of, what are you doing here shift type of thing. And so as an MLA, I had many of those. I had some of the very positive ones, and I've had areas where people would say, "Are you looking for the washroom?" You know, you've had that. You go into a meeting as an MLA because you're invited, and usually, you know, maybe it may be 90% suits in the room, males, white males, and maybe the odd woman or two. So you go into the space. Nobody's expecting you, and so they figure, well, she must be lost here. So, you know, you got to go and introduce yourself, and, you know, those things are never comfortable.
I know they're not, but
They're never comfortable. But you do it. You do it because it's part of your work. It's part of your portfolio, you know.
right.
You know, if you got an insurance portfolio and there's meetings, you got to go to them. If it's housing, they have meetings, you got to go to them, whether they expect you or not. You go in, you shake hands,
Yep.
which I don't enjoy most of the time, but you shake hands and
Yeah.
you get to know the people in the space,
Right.
Because at that time, that is your community, that space. You know, I have a different version of
point.
community
Yeah.
oftentimes when people ask me about community. To me, wherever you show up, whether it's for 10 minutes or for 10 hours, that is your community, and you respect yourself in that space the way you should, going anywhere.
I like that. This is why I love having conversations with you. Because you always put a nice spin on things. And we had this great conversation around, you know, fashion and politics and how we carry ourselves. And I think that was very interesting for me because,
Yes.
as you know, I like fashion. But also, we don't want to ever also change who we are because who we are got us in those positions.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
So you want to speak to that about, like, because that's what you opened up with, like, people approached you to say,
Right.
you know, we want you to represent us, right?
Well, one of the things, though, when I ran, I had dreadlocks, right?
Yes.
And they were
I remember.
and they were starting to grow out. So
Right.
you know what dreadlocks are like when they're just starting to grow out, but I loved them. And I had many people say that I shouldn't have them. That was not going to be a good thing for me. People didn't know what they were. They looked too rough and they looked too scruffy. But that was me, right? And I didn't change it, right? And you can see in some of the, if you look at some of the older photos and pictures and some of the articles in the newspaper, I had them. And, you know, I let them grow. I had cut them a few times because they grew so long. Yeah, but I mean, you hear comments like that. I didn't think that had anything to do with the way that I dressed properly and the way that I conducted myself, that my hair should be an issue.
So one other question that I have for you, you know, you've been involved in various initiatives and promoting, you know, education and empowerment. Could you share some examples of your successful community incentives that you're most proud of?
Well, I think there's a couple of things. When I was with the Community Justice Society, we had a program in East Preston.
Yes.
And it was to engage young people
Right.
Around, you know, personal empowerment. So we would have round tables and circles like that. So that was one of the big things. And when I worked with community justice as well, we had the ceasefire program.
Yes.
Which was a very large program.
Yes.
And it was, from my point of view, was very successful. What kicked off 902 Men Up, that program kind of kicked off 902 Men Up, who engaged in doing activities with some of the same people we work with.
Right.
Around programming. We didn't have a lot of program because we established through research and surveys and that sort of thing where the young people were, what they needed. We didn't provide what they needed, but we did all that research and we have those reports that moved 902 Men Up to a place where it said, okay, so now we need services.
That's right.
We have to do that
Cater
now.
to the community.
So we're going to lead this to make this larger and bigger because we see all these young people who may be in and out of jail or on the street with guns
system.
and they need some services.
Yeah.
So for me, wherever you start, if people can build on it, help yourself.
That's it. I love that.
You know, you don't have to own this stuff.
Right.
You started. Even with the program I don't want to put on the next step, I don't want to own it. I want to start
Put it in place.
Put it in place and let other people grab it, hold it, and move it forward.
You're a strong foundation to launch off. So I see you like a launch pad. But these are the reasons why we need folks like you, why we need young folks who are willing to kind of jump into politics, community politics,
Yes.
and to, you know, the bigger scene of politics. If you could say to our audience today, for those who are considering or thinking about it or just on the fence, what would you encourage them to say in terms of, their go for politics, their run into politics?
Well, I would say, first have an internal conversation with yourself.
Yeah.
Try to figure out what you're talking to yourself about. Then talk to your people that know you, people that you trust, people who will encourage you. That's a good place to start. And you worry about the other stuff later as you slowly build your team. I would advise people to take time. You can't start running today and be elected tomorrow. Most people can't.
Right.
But you build on it. If you want a long-term, seat in politics one way or the other, and it doesn't have to be, a politician.
Right.
You can work behind the scenes. But you got to build on it and figure out if this is what you really want.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
And if you do, then just go for it.
I love it. Is there anything else you would like to say before we wrap the show?
I want to thank you very much. This is great. No, this has been really good. I'm glad I participated in this. Brought back a lot of memories.
Yes.
And I think moving forward, we can do a lot of work.
Oh, absolutely.
Community is growing.
Absolutely.
Yes, because you see where I started as the first. And look, you see all these beautiful women who are now involved, and there's more to come.
Absolutely. There's more to come.
Yes.
There you have it. This is Ms. Yvonne Atwell, the first Black MLA in Nova Scotia. She has been talking to me about her experience and her viewpoint around the current political climate in Nova Scotia. And if you haven't already, heed to her advice. And those of you who are thinking about it, by all means, consider the points, consider, your run in politics. And for those of you who haven't signed and subscribed, please hit our bell to connect the channel, and that way you can get community updates for the future coming episodes. I'm Nicole Johnson, and we'll see you soon.